Hey, this is Universa. I'm here on another episode of Serving Up Comics. We're very anticipated for the arrival of Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness. So we had a special guest drop by, my friend and leading Ditko expert, comic book artist Javier Hernandez. How are you doing, Javier?
Very good, Gene. Good to be here. And yeah, talking some Ditko and Doctor Strange. That's not a hard thing to get me to do.
Yeah, you're a big Ditko fan. I see. I know he's had a lot of influence on your work, on just you've been on panels talking about him at Long Beach Comic Con. So yeah, it's cool to have you back on the podcast to chat about that.
Well, I wrote the zine on Ditko, not the book, but yeah, I did this. You don't know Ditko comic book size zine.
Mm-hmm.
I'd done a previous one a few years before, like zine size, and then decided to do like an expanded version, just add a lot more pages, more content,
Mm-hmm.
and actually debuted it. Was it last year? Man, you know how things are the last 3 years. It's a big
Yeah.
time warp. Yeah, it was last year in Johnstown, Pennsylvania.
Oh wow.
Steve Ditko's hometown. They held the Bottle Works museum there, the big local museum. They held a special month-long like Steve Ditko art tribute.
Mm-hmm.
So, the Ditko family, the Ditko estate was involved. They approved it, and yeah, I flew out to Johnstown. It was actually my first trip way out, East Coast. It was also my first airplane trip in 2 years at least. So it's pretty exciting. So I debuted that zine there, and there was a big art show, and they had a couple of panels during, and that little Ditko Con. That was the thing.
Nice.
I think the last day of the exhibit, they held a Ditko Con, in a neighboring building. So yeah, I was invited to participate. I had a little table selling my comics, but also the Ditko zine. And there were other people there selling, a lot of dealers selling back issues, focusing on Ditko, and then a lot of other, some other cartoonists and such. So it was pretty neat. I mean, it's about, going to the Mecca for Ditko,
Yeah.
Johnstown, Pennsylvania. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I guess, Ditko passed away in 2018. So the family, obviously the estate, they're very interested in preserving the legacy of, their brother, their uncle,
Mm-hmm.
whatever the relationships are in the various members there, to preserve his legacy, his whole legacy. It's not, he's not just Spider-Man and Doctor Strange, which of course are Spider-Man, obviously probably one of the top 5 like fictional characters on the planet. So that's definitely, get his credit out there, but they just want to preserve his entire 60-year legacy of all the work he's done. So anyway, I just wanted to bring that up, talking
Oh,
about
of course.
going to Johnstown, Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and I believe we talked about this in interviews with you before, but yeah, there's just always been like a lot of misconceptions, a lot of just misreporting on Steve Ditko because I think, as you said before, he was just a really private person. He just didn't care to do didn't care for interviews, and he let his art and his work speak for itself. So yeah, it's good to have that out there as well.
Yeah. Yeah, for decades, the word reclusive, hermit, and then, any and worse words
Yeah.
would always be thrown about because like you just said, he's very private. Like in this day and age, I don't mind doing interviews. I got social network presence everywhere.
Yeah.
But when someone doesn't do that, they're weird. They're not just, oh, he doesn't do it. Maybe we're weird. I don't know. But
Yeah.
he would communicate. He would communicate with fans, anybody who wrote him a letter, an actual handwritten letter.
Mm-hmm.
He'll go to his, it'll come to his studio office. They'll put it to the mail slot, and then he's got this pile of letters he goes through. I don't know if he had a routine, but when he passed away, his brother and his 2 nephews, one of them Mark, I've got to luckily befriend in the last 2 years. They went to New York. Hey, we got to clean out, the studio. When they got to the door of the studio, unlocked it and such, trying to push that door open because, what was on the floor was piles of letters that accumulated after Ditko passed. I'm not sure how many weeks it was before they got
Right.
there, whatever. But that's amazing, just the constant flow of letters, because people didn't know he passed away. There was the regular amount of letters that showed up, whatever, every week. So yeah, that's pretty. I mean, that's an amazing thing, like. So don't tell me he doesn't talk to people.
Yeah,
He
exactly.
communicated.
Yeah,
Letters.
I think there was like an infamous letter he had to some fan back in the '60s about Spider-Man. I'm not sure if you know that story.
Well, I mean, which
Oh,
letter? Like, I'm sure he got like what's.
yeah. I think they were asking about something about like the Green Goblin reveal or something, and I forgot what it was, but yeah, he was just kind of he communicated back, like they're asking for his autograph with fans.
Yeah, he would always write back, even if it's a no, I don't do autographs. And it's
Right.
interesting because you know, just the lost art of letter writing. You write
Hmm.
a letter, and then you sign it, and then in his case, he would sign the letter, and then underneath he would print his name. So you are actually getting an autograph, but
Yeah.
he's not. Yeah, I mean, but he's not meeting a. I mean, that's just like, hey, this is how you write a letter, and you sign off on it. So plenty of people have Steve Ditko autographs. Um, kind of weird thing after he passed away. You'd see people selling the letters, and
Hmm.
they'd highlight the listing on Steve Ditko autograph, and then like you see, oh, it's your letter that you get.
Yeah.
You
I
know,
was gonna say it's kind of like a Marvel no prize, right?
yeah. Although that was an empty envelope, right? This is like,
Right.
yeah, but here you get a
Yeah.
signature and his name in print. You're getting it twice,
Hmm.
or you got
Yeah.
it twice. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. And then you were talking when we were like kind of messaging. When I was telling you kind of the theme of the episode, just kind of Ditko and his work. You were telling me some of the early comics of his. You said that there were a lot of like kind of ghost or suspense stories. What can you elaborate on that? Because I've not heard of that actually, and I'm pretty curious.
Yeah, well, it's so funny. You take things, like, I look at his work and I read it and stuff, and I collect it and these collections. But when you go, hey, I'd like to come on the podcast if you can. I want to talk about Ditko and his early work and such, and his pre-Doctor Strange work. And I actually thought about it, and it just hit me. It's like, well, you know what? He spent those, first almost maybe what 8 years doing comics before he got to
Mhm.
Marvel in the early '60s, doing uh and comics, ghosts, in the '50s. So it's like, okay, ghost stories,
Yeah,
whatever you want to call it, horror,
romance.
suspense, romance, sci-fi. But yeah, like, wow, that was his training ground, or at least that's where he developed some of the skills for haunted houses, creepy shadows, ghosts, graveyards, sorcery. Yeah, so it really, like, well, duh, yeah, of course. I mean, so when he got to doing Doctor Strange,
Hmm.
it's not like he had to think about, well, how do I do a haunted house? But yeah, as a young cartoonist, that's what he cut his teeth on. I guess like so many back. I mean, those were the genres that were so huge in the '50s. I mean,
Yeah.
go look at the EC Comics guy. So yeah, I mean, right off the top, Dick was doing horror, scary stuff, monsters, zombies, people killing one another. Yeah, graveyards, sloping shadows, and
Hmm.
spider webs, and yeah, it's funny. It's all in there later, obviously in Doctor Strange. And then he added that whole dimensional traveling and the mystic spells and all that. I mean, that was really went wild on the Doctor Strange era. But yeah, his early training ground as an early cartoonist was in those genres.
Yeah, and you could see that a lot in those early like Doctor Strange comics and Strange Tales. I mean, even some of the Spider-Man stuff are a little like spooky. Just the way like I would say like Goblin or like Mysterio's like illusions, things
Yeah,
like
the
that.
Goblin.
So.
Exactly. It's really interesting, and I'm not being one of those name dropper guys, but literally because of
Mhm.
what you're talking about. Yesterday, when we May 1st, I don't know when this is airing, but
Yeah.
I was at the Latino Comics Expo, the convention I co-founded in 2011. It
Hmm.
was down here in Long Beach at the Museum of Latin American Art. I was talking to Gilbert Hernandez. He was cabling there, right?
Mhm.
And then we're just talking about he loves Ditko. We're talking about Ditko, and we're talking about like yeah, the early Marvel stuff, like you just said. Spider-Man was way better under him because it was all Romita's great. I mean, but he
Mhm.
draws everything so beautiful and pretty. But you saw the Ditko stuff, yeah, it was really creepy looking. And he goes, and in all the early Marvel, because they can't Marvel was coming out of doing their 50s run of monsters and sci-fi and so many monsters. So by the time the earliest FF comics and the earliest Spider-Man, the only difference is like the main character is wearing like colorful spandex. But yeah, you're right. That creepiness of the art and you know a lot of the monsters and the horror element, it kind of just flowed into the very early Marvel comics. And then you look at the early Marvel comics, they start getting a little more refined, and then it becomes like really colorful Saturday morning uh superhero cartoon,
Yeah.
real fun stuff. So it's interesting now you brought that up.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's also interesting to note that those early like the first he's on the first like 39 issues, is that correct? 39,
Yeah,
36
Spider-Man, yeah, I
for
think it's
Spider-Man, yeah.
30. Yeah, I think it's 38 or 39
Yeah. Well,
first.
I had a friend that's been rereading all the 60s runs from those original first couple Marvels, so like Doctor Strange, Iron Man. Out of all of them, and I've read them, read Spider Man, Avengers, but the other ones I've kind of skipped around. But just from the impression he was giving me, I feel like Spider Man is the most fully formed out of all the Marvel heroes because if you look at Daredevil, some of those comics are good, but it feels a little bit of a knockoff of Spider Man, or like X Men doesn't really find its footing till like Neil Adams or like
Right.
Dave Cockrum takes over in the 70s. I wonder like because we're going to get into the Marvel method, how much of Ditko put into himself in those early issues.
Yeah, really good point about Daredevil for one, because I think Bill Everett did the first few, and then somebody else came aboard, and then like X-Men, yeah, Kirby did what the first 10, and then he left. Um, they weren't top priority or something, but with Spider-Man, yeah, it was a two-man operation. Stan Lee and Steve Ditko. Um, but from everything what we could read or learn about, I think at least when you deep dive on Ditko, I mean, he had a very definite plan with Spider-Man. Like in the
Mhm.
beginning, the first maybe 18, 19 issues. I mean, you look at the credit pages, it says, written by Stan Lee, art by Steve Ditko. But almost halfway through the series, you look at the credits again, or maybe a little over halfway point, it starts saying written by Stanley. Actually, so Stanley gave himself two titles at that point: edited and written by Stan, plotted and
Mhm.
illustrated by Steve Ditko. It's kind of funny, right? Because Stan didn't want to just be the writer. Like, well, if Ditko gets two titles, I get. But
Yeah.
I guess Stan was the editor. But yeah, so Ditko was. We don't know how early he started plotting it on his own, but at one point, because then the two men weren't talking either. There's
Right.
that. So I think a lot of people don't know this. I mean, I think people think nowadays like the writer, the writer on the comic, it's like the writer in the movie. Like they've written the whole story from A to Z.
Mhm.
Everything is in there. No, that's not the way the Marvel method worked. And Stan has even said it. This is not even Stan bashing. It's like we sat down. It's like me and Gene talking about a story of a character. I kind of maybe had an idea and I give it to Gene, and Gene tosses back some ideas. And okay, so the first issue, he fights a flying saucer lands, and he fights an alien that comes out and kicks its butt. And then
Right.
so then Gene goes home and draws a story based on that. But he has, as the artist, you have to fill out the whole story, the subplots and little side things that happen. So that's how the Marvel method worked. And with Ditko, at one point he was asking for no, I'm doing this. I'm basically writing the plots.
Mhm.
So that's like a plotting edit. So then when Stan would get the pages back, like I said, from the beginning, Stan would get these pages back, a whole story with no dialogue, maybe some things on the side indication, but Stan would have to look through it and then figure out what should each character say that
Yeah.
goes with the artwork that's already there. Because you're not going to go and change the artwork really, because you, the writer, well, I want this to happen. Like, okay, well, this kind of has to happen. He's got to reach for the refrigerator and pull it open, and then so whatever. So you had, when you say, oh, he wrote the comics, it's like, well, what does that mean? Does it mean, well, maybe it means he dialogued, that great Stan Lee dialogue is unmistakable. And,
Yeah.
so much rhythm to poetry to, when we sit down and read those comics, there's a certain really nice rhythm and fun poetry and silliness to it. It's Stan Lee's voice that I'm reading, but he's riffing off the story that's already there, either by Kirby or we're talking Ditko in this case. So that explains to people who don't know, like, oh, why is it say plotted by Ditko now when it before it didn't?
Yeah.
So to your point, so Ditko always seemed to have a very definite arc of what he wanted to do with this young teenager, this scrawny teenager with the spider powers, and get him to college. And it was Ditko's belief that once Peter got to college, they'd have to stop all the hijinks as far as like, oh, I got money problems and girl problems. Cause like, Ditko's like, well, teenager, yeah, we all get the pass on that. But, you gotta, I don't say man up, but you gotta, get your foot on solid ground at that point. So had he stuck around, because Peter did graduate high school, right, in the run. And I guess, I don't remember exactly how many issues it was with, Ditko doing that when he's in college, but when he left, and Romita came aboard, and I love Romita's art.
Yeah, it's
fantastic. Yeah, but Romita did romance comics at DC and stuff. So the book, everybody got prettier, which is great.
Yeah,
beautiful, fantastic. Peter kind of filled out, and everything got nicer and cleaner. But if you really look at those books, I mean, as a kid, I loved them all, and I still do. But there's a certain repeating, every issue. Like Peter's always having problems, and now, like. I don't think we may not have seen a speculation, but I don't think you would have seen that had Ditko stayed.
Yeah.
Some of that stuff might have not been so relevant. I mean, you still have the great stories of action and the villains, and that stuff. And, but so anyway, it's interesting. It'd be interesting if he stuck around, would they be clashing even more? And would Stan even say, hey, we got to, make Peter more fallible? And then would somebody quit at that point? Anyway. Yeah, that's all speculation, but yeah, like you're saying, if you just go back and read the early Ditko Spider-Mans and just check out the certain, maybe it's a slow arc of Peter Parker, going to manhood, but it's interesting. It's one of those endless speculations you'll always have, but I think some of the proof is in what's there.
Yeah, it's interesting to think about that though. If he stayed on, like in some alternate right. Earth, he did
multiverse. We're talking about.
Yeah. And then
there's a 100th Spider-Man issue by Steve Ditko and Stan Lee. It's like, oh man, I want to see that.
Yeah, and also too, I think for Romita jumping on, it kind of like works where you age with Spider-Man, and then the style kind of changes, you know. So that's interesting to see, but
you get out of that awkward skinny teenager phase, which Ditko really had down, and then like, okay, now he's now Peter's a male model. When did that happen?
Yeah, so went through some puberty. I was gonna say though, it's interesting for you're talking about some Ditko's art style. I love how lanky and like some of the Lizard is some of these villains aren't really bulky. They're just kind of like elongated, and they have like such an interesting look to them as well.
Yeah, well, again, he's one of those guys that has such a great skill at drawing clothes. So yeah, the clothes hangs on the characters. He knows his folds, he knows his drapery, and yeah, I don't want to complain about the modern comics. Not even that modern, but at one point, somebody started making the lizard monstrous, and every book, every new movie, he looks like Godzilla now. And I don't know, I like, Ditko came from a different era, so he looked at I never heard him say this, but like, I think when he did the Lizard, he's thinking of Lon Chaney's Wolfman. So it's a man turns to lizard skin, whatever, but he's still built like a 5'10" guy. Yeah, he's not a huge monster, and the clothes isn't all ripped off. It's just he's got a lab coat. It's very Wolfman, the Lizard, and I like that stuff. And like I said, Doc Ock was pudgy. Craven was bulky, definitely buffed up.
Yeah.
But Ditko's faces, right? The really drawn, like the sunken cheeks and the buggy eyes and the bags on the villains and the wrinkles. Yeah, I mean, such distinct styles.
Yeah, it's very
the villains. The villains today remind me of like just any common wrestler. Like they're all built the exact same. the same exact build and muscle build. Ditko's guys were distinctive, like you said. Some Green Goblin, that early one you're talking about, was scrawny and skinny and creepy and hunched over, and yeah, the cackling face. It's like you get me excited for all these early stories again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean, I think they're pretty timeless. They're, fun to revisit and read, seeing where it all started. I was gonna say too. I think I was reading somewhere when I was doing some research there. Someone had like a high school photo of Ditko, and he kind of looks like that early Peter with the glasses and the suit.
Yeah, yeah. I remember his nephew Mark Ditko. He's very active on Facebook and such, and he said something like, "Well, every kid looked like Peter Parker in that photograph." Back then,
Yeah.
but yeah, I think people have identified which one was Ditko, and there's the 2 or 3 shots in the one annual, the high school annual. But yeah, the big glasses. That first page of Amazing Fantasy 15, the first Spider-Man page. The skinny Peter Parker standing there at the school with the people laughing at him. I mean, yeah, that's very, very much looks like that high school photograph. I think it's a collared shirt with maybe a vest, sweater vest, and yeah, the hair, those big glasses. It's
Yeah.
you draw what you know as an artist. Sometime I think Ditko was like, "Oh, high school kid, okay. Oh, I remember I had glass." Again, he never said that, but you look at the photograph, you look at the drawings. It's not hard to imagine that.
No, definitely. And then I remember, I believe it's the first annual where there's like a self drawing of himself and he's like asleep at his desk. You know the one I'm talking
That
about?
exactly, absolutely, yeah, yeah. That's such a rare thing. Like, wow, he drew himself in what, maybe 3 or 4 other panels.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's like such a that's all we had for years. Like, no, because there's no photographs.
Yeah.
Um,
And also, I think too in the all the promotional material, because I think they had like they used to have like records or stuff for the Marvel Marching Society. I
right.
think like Ditko was noticeably absent on like on the record or all
Yeah,
that too.
yeah. Stanley had all everybody in the bullpen, whatever, like say something on the record, and I think somebody, I think Sol Brodsky, the production manager, said something like, "Hey, Steve just slipped out the window, Stan."
Yeah, yeah. I remember, I remember listening to that. I think I found it on YouTube, and it's like it's pretty funny.
I don't know if Ditko ever got a copy of that record, but I don't know
Yeah.
if he'd be with that.
And then, what can you say about his non-Marvel work? I know he did Question, Hawk and Dove for DC, but not as familiar with the charlatan characters like Mr. A. What can
Well,
you tell about
yeah.
that?
So Mitt was self-published. Wally Wood, the great,
Hmm.
1950s EC artist and early Marvel artist and such. By the late 60s, Wally was like, "Hey, you know what? We got to make our own comics that we own." So he put together this zine. They call it a pro zine, I think, right? A professional zine, because it's mostly professionals were in it, but independently published a book called Wits End. And yeah, he would call his compatriots in the comic biz to contribute. So
Hmm.
Ditko, found out about it and was invited. And I guess he had this idea for this Mr. A character. This is kind of his signature character, because it's creator owned. Um, Dealing with the idea of black and white, what's justice, and a little bit of Ayn Rand's objectivist philosophy, including, and then mixed with Ditko's own personal
Hmm.
beliefs on liberty and such. So yeah, he went independent in the late, I don't know, it might have been 68. So God, I
Hmm.
mean, what does that make Mr. A almost 60 years old?
Yeah,
50. I mean, that's a long record. That's a long
it's
time for an
crazy.
independent character. But yeah, so before Marvel, he worked on Charlton, and then even during the 60s, I think probably later 60s, while he was doing Spider-Man, he would be doing Charlton when they wanted to do superheroes. So I think, yeah, he revised the Blue Beetle.
Hmm.
So it was the Beetle we've had for maybe 50 years until they updated him with the was it Jaime Reyes?
Yeah, I mean, Reyes.
So, yeah, like the armor Blue Beetle.
Hmm.
And then yeah, at Charlton is where he worked on Captain Atom, and then he also created his own character there at Charlton, the Question, which you mentioned, um, which I think was his first foray into like doing that type of lone hero, kind of that black and white type of thing. But because it was through Charlton Comics Code, he couldn't go too extreme. That's why I think. And then when he got a chance to do Mr. A, where he went pure like 100% what Ditko wanted to do with that.
Yeah.
And then after that and then of course I'm sure we'll talk about Doctor Strange, but after Marvel he bounced back to Charlton, did something at DC. You mentioned, I think, Hawk and Dove, and the Creeper came after in the mid 70s.
Right.
Hawk and Dove, and what's this other DC kid? Oh no,
I think there's another
the Creeper.
one.
It's the Creeper.
Yeah,
I'm
the
sorry.
Creeper. Yeah.
Yeah, he came back into the Creeper in the mid 70s, but yeah, he created the Creeper at DC along with Hawk and Dove that same era, and then he got sick at one point with tuberculosis, which back in the day was a horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's why the Creeper story just stops maybe mid book, I think, if I remember, and Hawk and Dove as well. So yeah, I think he had 2 bouts with tuberculosis. So
wow.
He'd have to go back home to Johnstown and just recover. I'm thinking it's a rare thing nowadays, right? But back then it could. I mean, life and death. We may not be talking about a full career is right now if things worked out a different way for him. So
right. I was gonna say too. It's interesting that he's one of the an independent comic creator for a while. I can't think of any other off the top of my head creators that went that route from that era too. I mean, besides like Will Eisner, right?
Yeah, we'd have to say he's independent because he would make individual deals with publishers to do his graphic novels. But Ditko, so he did independent in that late 60s Wits End stuff, but then he'd always bounce back, between even come back to Marvel in the 70s, Dell Comics, Atlas Comics. But like in 1988 is really like a certain start. I think that's about almost the midway of his entire career, 58 to 88. Yeah, then he partnered with a friend of his, Robin Snyder, who was a writer and editor, I guess, and they kind of formed a publishing partnership where it was called Snyder Ditko. It was just them two. They didn't publish other people's books, and Snyder would publish it. He would handle the taking care of the printing and distribution. Ditko would just have an outlet from 88 till he passed away, 30 years something, to just do the comics that he wanted to do, and he wouldn't worry about. There wasn't much it was a low-key operation, so it's not like, if we don't hit certain sales, we got to cancel it. Like, well, just do what you want. We'll get it out there, low-run stuff, and let the fans get it and find it, whatever. And throughout his life, Ditko would still work bounce around Marvel, DC. Did something at Fantagraphics once or twice, something at Force. But he had that independent home like for the rest of his life, so that's pretty neat.
I was gonna say, isn't there like he worked on ROM Space Knight?
Yeah, that's when I was a kid. Comic, I was like, I already knew about Ditko because I as a young kid.
Oh wow!
I think that's one of my first. This is a small paperback, so in case people don't think it's not a full book. As a kid, I could read these tiny word balloons, but oh my god, I was looking through it before we went on. It's like, man, because the page is small. It's like, well, my cell phone. Someone just tells my cell phone. Wow. So imagine how small the word balloons are, the dialogue. Jeez. But as a kid, you're a small kid, you're just reading this. So this is my earliest Ditko. And when I started buying comics in the 70s, like, oh look, Steve Ditko's doing ROM Space Knight after Salvi 7, so things like that.
Yeah, I would really love. I have to look up some of those comics because I think the idea of just like ROM, like this 80s comic, just drawn by like Ditko, it's like this other era artist,
Yeah.
And
it's funny because ROM, the storyline, I mean, it was based on a toy, but it has like a 1950s vibe to it because it's like, it's actually ahead of its time, the plot by Bill Mantlo. It's these aliens, the dire wraiths, which is an interesting name. They it's like the Skrulls, whatever, or X-Files, where they're here amongst us, but they assume, human disguise like you and me, or scientists or politicians, and they're all over the world. So ROM comes from another planet and he's got to eradicate them. So yeah, like you said, he's another, artist from another era type guy.
Yeah.
But that whole B movie plot of ROM, it kind of works, right? So I don't think I made that connection before. That's kind of cool you said that.
Yeah, and then too, his style and art were always evolving, changing. I mean, he was working up until his death as well. Yeah. So it's just interesting to see his art, his art style just keep evolving too.
He gets a lot of flack or commentary about the actual, like the women, the clothes, or even the men, even the kids. it's like, okay, it's 1980s now or 1990s, and like yeah, people look like they're, it's like 1958, 1963.
Yeah.
Like he wouldn't really adapt to whatever the styles or the clothes were of the day for the most
Yeah.
part. So yeah, there's a really interesting, especially looking back at someone I worked from the 80s, which is now 30 years old. There's a certain timelessness about it, because like, wait, is this in the 50s or is this
Hmm.
done in 55? So but his art simplified, into his later years, last 10, 15 years. It's almost, again, I don't know, it was almost like he was drawing with a ballpoint pen,
Hmm.
because everything had the same thin line.
Hmm.
And it was doing, the books were published in black and white. So yeah, I mean, I'd love to get some of those originals if they're actually even drawn on 8.5 by 11 paper. Um, I got the sense that they were, because like they're almost drawn to the size of the actual comic that was published, but I couldn't say for sure. But yeah, even in with a simplified art style, sometimes less detail, sometimes not. In his later last 10 or 5 years, you can look at his 50s work, 60s. It's Ditko.
Yeah.
Like the body, the way he builds bodies, the facial, the way the heads are built, the way the eyes are, and the backgrounds, the buildings and such. Yeah, he's got an unmistakable style. I mean, you get a lot of guys who kind of draw very
Hmm.
Kirby-esque over the
Yeah.
years. There's some really good ones. You very rarely see Ditko-esque artist, or Gene Colan for that matter. I mean, that guy's super stylized.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's interesting. But the influence, like people like me and so many others. I mean, obviously, I don't look at Ditko and like, okay, let me try to draw like that. But I looked at that stuff so much when I'm drawing. I mean, I subconsciously, it's just like, yeah, I like the way, I like bending the hand on the character. Like the human hand only goes that far, but I like that extra maybe 10 degrees. It just looks cool, and
Yeah.
and or the feet, whatever, the ankle. Yeah, that's a whole topic there. That's really interesting to be talked about. Like, how does an artist take an influence from another artist? Why do they take it? Do they know they're taking it? When they see the final result, are they happy with that? Or so anyway, but that's, maybe come back one day with a psychologist and talk
Oh
about that.
yeah, it's like a whole like subconscious topic, right? Like to
I
study or
think it is.
something. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is.
Okay, kind of covering the other character in his Marvel career, Doctor Strange. He co-created it with Stan Lee in Strange Tales. It was a backup, or excuse me, I believe it was a backup issue in that comic. It was 110. Um,
5 pages. The
5
first.
pages, yeah. And it's like kind of this like it reminded me more of Amazing Fantasy than anything else, right? Where it's just like this Twilight Zone sort of like one-off story, right?
Right.
With a twist, he's astral projecting himself while this guy's trying to like shoot him, you know?
Yeah, I know, it's interesting. Yeah, I reread it before our episode here, and yeah, I forgot it had that little. It's a weird mystery story with supernatural, but that's kind of like a crime comic element. Like
Hmm.
whenever someone shoots somebody to cover up the crime that he killed that guy. But um, so I gotta say, I wouldn't get my Ditko street cred if I didn't let this pass. So Spider-Man co-creator Stanley, you can definitely say that. Not I mean you personally, but yeah, we could say
Yeah.
that. But Doctor Strange, Stan blows it sometimes when he tells the truth. He wrote a letter to the fanzines in the 60s, so everybody knows, like, kids, teenagers, even young college people, zines were really popular, fanzines, right? Like, oh,
Hmm.
let's write a little magazine articles about our favorite comic books coming out. um so Stan, would have a good, he was a good editor, he was a good PR guy. He would write to these fanzines and give them maybe little tidbits of what's coming up, whatever, and it's been reprinted many times, so I'm not making this up.
Yeah.
He told this one fanzine, like, hey guys, so we got something new coming out, in whatever, Strange Tales 110, whatever. Yeah, something like, we got, we'll try it out. It's kind of this black magic character.
Hmm.
See how it is. He goes, it was, he ends the thing with, it was Steve's idea. So everybody jumps on that, like right there. He said it. Now Stan Lee may sometimes say things that aren't 100% true, but he's not going to go and lie about
Hmm.
like give another guy credit, about that. So yeah, we don't know the exact uh, scenario where Steve brought it in, like, hey, this is my idea. I think it's kind of accepted that maybe Stan came up with the name, and then
Right.
some people speculate like, is Doctor Strange called Stephen Strange? Is that some type of little like, not a jab, but a little like funny
Yeah.
wink at Steve? Like, oh, this is weird. Whatever. It's a cool name, Stephen Strange. It's got that Marvel Stan Lee alliteration thing, but yeah, I just wanted to put that out there in case people hadn't heard that. It's just not like Stan Lee had the idea for this particular character and gave it to Steve to draw and help him with. It's kind of like the other way around where the
Hmm.
artist came up with had this concept of this magic guy, and then but yeah, obviously again, like you said, Stan's dialogue, probably naming a lot of the names. Dormammu sounds so Stan Lee, the name, but
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Has an Excelsior sort of ring to it.
yeah,
Uh,
so flamboyant.
yeah. No, I didn't know that. I didn't know from that like particular zine that's what Stan said because
Yeah,
oh yeah, I always find it really interesting because I love Stan and I don't want to like bash Stan, but it's interesting when like because there's like Stan Lee, the guy in the Marvel bullpen, and then there's like Stan Lee, the persona, like the character that he's
right.
kind of playing to the fans, and then when that kind of like it was kind of like the when those like when the character kind of goes away and he's just talking about like just the early days and everything and like yeah he's a little like more honest and like not honest but a little more like willing to like talk about certain stuff and everything so I always just find that like really like interesting I guess.
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely interesting. Yeah, you're talking about Stan. Yeah, he has different tones. I mean, usually he's always on.
Hmm.
As far as like, yeah, I had these ideas for all these characters, and then sometimes, yeah, sometimes I hit, sometimes he slips. I mean, I don't know how
Yeah.
else to put it. I mean, I don't want to go over too old history, but the first Spider-Man film, Sam Raimi, 2002, probably.
Yeah. Yeah.
It was this nice hardcover, The Making of Spider-Man movie book. They make those all the time. And I remember the intros by, he'd always write the intro to anything Marvel, anything Spider-Man related.
Hmm.
But is it, he's writing about Spidey and everything. And then he goes, yeah, me and Ditko created him. And, it's like when he was writing that, he probably was so elated at that point. Again, I'm totally speculation, but I can see
Hmm.
where this film is about to debut, right? So he writes the intro for this hardcover, months before. I think everybody sensed in the air, like this thing is going to be a monster hit. Like Spidey is finally going to be put on the movie map,
Yeah.
like Batman and Superman at that time. And when I read that, I just go, wow, that's interesting. Like he sounds like he's almost sitting out on his patio having some lemonade, and yeah, we created that. We did it. Other times he doesn't say that. So yeah, I mean, again,
Yeah.
not to bash him, but I'm just saying that what I'm saying is true. Sometimes he can say it that they co-created it, and sometimes it's always like, no, I'm the writer. I came up with. I feel the guy who
Yeah.
created it.
Or he'll say, I consider him the co-creator.
That look that up, folks. In Search of Steve Ditko, a
That's
documentary from the BBC from
hmm
probably that era.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's
Anyway, not
John.
Stan's best moment, but thank God that that's caught on videotape, so no one can say you're lying. He didn't say that. Blah blah
Mhm.
blah. But yeah, like you said, Stan wrote all the dialogue that I've ever read from a classic Marvel comic. If his name's on it, he wrote it, and it's like, yeah, I love. That's how I remember these stories. Like, oh yeah, the way Jameson is screaming or Ben Grimm is talking. It's because Stan was like the Mel Blanc in a way. Like he had the kind of like thousand voices that he had to give a lot of these different characters.
Mhm.
But anyway, yeah, that's
And then I was gonna say it's really interesting, kind of talking about the personalities and like kind of the aesthetics of each comic because looking at those like early Doctor Strange comics, I think like people like I don't know if anyone asked Stan or asked like Ditko like I don't know if they asked him like oh have you tried any like like something like a drug or like LSD because they're kind of like that weird like trippiness of that era. And I think like famously like Ditko was like very like straight edged. I don't
yeah.
think he didn't really, obviously partake, but it really kind of captured that aesthetic of that era, you know.
Yeah, it's no, that's been talked about a lot over the years, and yeah, he'd be like, I'm sure he was like surprised to hear that. No, that's not what we did. I think Ralph Macchio.
Hmm.
I think on that documentary, which we really got to recommend to people, maybe link it.
Yes,
Or,
of
I
course.
think Ralph Macchio, not the actor, the editor of
Yeah.
these 90s. He's on it. He sounds like a great guy, and he's telling a story, I think, where he actually talked to Ditko in the 80s at the office. Like, hey, people were saying that you guys did drugs because the books and no, we didn't do that stuff. And I believe it. I don't think it's just covering up. Like, oh no, I don't talk about that. No, I mean, I think Ditko was so straight edge, kind of like Kirby. They were so straight, they
Hmm.
were punk.
Yeah, exactly. They were both. They have a lot of similarities too. I mean, they were both in the military. They
Yeah,
both kind of clashed with Stan a little bit in getting their work credited. Yeah, it's
and it's
interesting.
really it's unfortunate. Yeah, the three engines of Marvel is Stan Lee, the editor writer, and
Mhm.
then Kirby, the big chunk of the bulk of the early stuff, and then
Yeah,
Dick, Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, whatever. And yeah, they did not live happily ever after. The three of them,
yeah.
hanging out and stuff. And yeah, Kirby had his own problems. I'm sure you probably may cover that in episodes. And yeah, Ditko, he said to him and Stan, he said Stan quit talking to him
Hmm.
at one point. Maybe Stan didn't like Ditko getting plotter credit, whatever. But then at one point, Steve has said, and this gets rid of that whole Green Goblin ridiculous story that
Yeah.
Stan wanted this, Steve wanted something else, and Steve it's been written about. It came out in this newsletter through Robin Snyder that Robin Snyder would put out periodically under the comics. Was a newsletter. Ditko said, "Yeah, why would I want to work with someone who doesn't talk to me?" So one day, Ditko shows up to the Marvel offices, goes to the production guy, Sol Brodsky, with a big thick stack of new pages of Spider-Man. Here you go, Saul. That's my last page. I quit. I always used to joke like, man, imagine Saul Brodsky's got to go up to Stan's office because there's no forewarning. It's
Yeah.
like, Steve's gone.
Hmm.
What? And then what? A year later, maybe, and Jack's gone.
Hmm.
So that's that we all want to see the Marvel documentary series.
Yeah. Or yeah,
Action
like the televised version of that, because that seems like something out of like Mad Men or something.
That's what everybody says. It's that era, and yeah, I mean, office, egos, politics,
Hmm.
personalities. I mean, the hell with the character. Yeah, we all love the characters. I'm gonna go see the next Doctor Strange, but
Yeah.
man,
Same.
like those of us who really read,
Hmm.
I'm sure a lot of us are thankful for Tomorrow's Publishing. They put out a alter ego back issue, like covering the behind the scenes stories of the people who created the stuff. I mean, that
Hmm.
is to me. I mean, yeah, we love the comics. Don't get me wrong; it's popcorn and it's great candy and stuff. But as a creator myself, and just as a fan, and it's fascinating
Hmm.
the people, who they were, how they worked together, how they clashed together, how they worked
Yeah.
together again later and broke up again. And so, anyway,
Yeah, and I mean, there's a whole like interesting mythology there because like a lot of official, what have you, like novel or biographies or something by Marvel. I mean, they kind of like san, make it a little nicer. They kind of exclude
right.
some stuff.
One
Um,
thing, not to
mhm.
bring up negativity again. So
Sure,
when
sure.
Ditko passed away, and I think a few months later Stan passed,
Yeah,
which is very like, wow, that's, I mean, because Kirby passed almost 17 years before,
yeah.
and then it's had Steve and Stan, and then they both go so shortly. But and again, I don't mean this in a bad way. Like, I'd see a lot of fans, and again, I think a lot of these fans, they've only grown up with Marvel movies, so they believe like, oh, Stanley Kubrick. There'd be these tribute drawings where Stan is walking into on the heavenly cloud. There's Jack, there's Steve, and Stan shows up,
Hmm.
and like, oh, they're reunited once again. And it's like, that's not these guys were not dear friends. The three of
Hmm.
them,
Yeah,
post
they're just like
late.
coworkers.
Yeah, but because of some of the issues that Jack had with Stan and
Hmm.
Steve had with Stan, I mean, they weren't, they didn't hate each other, but it's just the idea, the mentality that this new era of fans have, because they see Stan on the big screen in every movie, and they think he created everything, and oh, he gave these stories to the artists, and they're all friends. Stuff like that would always just like, that's just kind of weird. I mean, I know they're
Yeah.
memorializing them, but they weren't like buddy. There was not nice things that happened between them. Because the artists Jack and Stan, it's Jack and
Hmm.
Steve. There was things that I was very unhappy with of how they're treated and this and that.
Yeah.
But again, like you said earlier, I can say I love Stan. I as a kid,
Hmm.
I loved him. I loved his work. I loved seeing him when he'd show up rare times or
Yeah.
whatever. But I guess it's like, I guess to me, and I don't have, my parents are still married after 60 something years, but I would guess it might be like having divorced parents.
Mm.
So something happened between the two parents. We don't know. Could be different issues. And they break up and there's that turmoil. But then you settle down like, well, I still love mom and I still love dad. They don't get along and they're not going to. And I have different relationship with each one. But so I kind of look at Stan like that. And Jack and Steve. But to be honest, like, I can look at Stan and see, I can list off more shortcomings, whatever you want to
Yeah.
call it. But again, I don't want to piss off your fans, and I'm not here to bash Stan.
Oh no. Yeah.
I just feel I have, and a lot of us do. We've been able to pull back and over the years really identify each of these three guys and their work and where things stand here and there. But I'm sure in the Doctor Strange film, it's going to say the credit created by Stan, based on the comic by Stan Lee, Steve Ditko, and it's going to be a fun moment.
And just kind of, I was just curious, just kind of your like you reading some of the biographies or just anything the Ditko family has said, because they're really kind of similar. Just looking at their backstory, like Steve Ditko and Jack Kirby, did they have like any correspondence or like interaction with each other?
Oh, Steve and Jack?
Yeah, I was just curious.
Yeah, nothing I've ever read like like an ongoing thing. I mean, the only that they maybe run into each other. Well, it's actually Jack left New York in the late '60s, very early '70s.
Hmm.
So he, what, actually probably when he first saw again, I guess you'd only see him maybe at the Marvel offices whenever
Yeah.
and they didn't work in the office, so they'd go home and bring the stuff in. So, yeah, honestly, I can't say. That's a good question because no one ever talks about, like, there's certainly no photographs of them too. So yeah, I don't think they had any you know friendship as far as like hanging out, whatever. There was a time where Jack
Hmm.
when Jack left the DC, I mean Marvel, late '60s, and he went over to DC, starting to set up all his eventually new gods. But like, hey, let's get Kirby to do stuff. I think there's this one image online where Jack was going to propose something like, I think it's called Super Mag, or some people say it was called Uncle Carmine's Fat City Comics, but I love that
Okay.
title.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, isn't that great? Carmine, if it's publisher, but Uncle
Yeah.
Carmine's Fat City Comics. Like, wow, that sounds so bizarro. But
Uh,
he wanted to put together some type of really special, not just a comic, but like some type of magazine comic, high
mhm.
end or something, bigger distribution. And there's this one image of Steve Ditko proposed, like Ditko would have had a storyline in there. I forgot the character's name. Oh man, I feel bad. But anyway, so I mean, Kirby knew of Ditko and supposedly he was wanting to invite him over for this venture, but then DC never approved that magazine thing. But then luckily Kirby went on to do New Gods instead, and his whole fourth world. But
Yeah.
yeah, to your question about them corresponding or not that I'm aware of, and it doesn't seem like anything's ever come up that they were pen pals or even phone call frequent phone
Mhm.
calls between them. It doesn't seem like that was anything that happened.
Yeah, gotcha. Yeah, because I always just find it really like interesting how kind of similar their careers went, where they both like dropped their dropped the Marvel book they were working,
Yeah,
went somewhere else. Both went to DC, created their own kind of like comic line. It's just really
and,
interesting.
and then go back to Marvel by the mid late '70s, and then maybe bounce. Yeah, then at that point just kind of bounce back and forth. But I mean, yeah, I mean, is that a testament to Stan Lee that his two main creative artists like both out? I'll let the fans out
Yeah,
there chew that one over, but
yeah, definitely. Yeah, I'm sure like the fans talked about it and like because I was gonna say all the if you read like the letters page, that was like the Twitter of the 1960s. Just
absolutely,
yeah.
yeah, that's a great. Stan Lee was in his, because he would do the editorial pages Yeah, he'd answer the letters pages, but also like he'd have the Stan Lee soapbox.
Hmm.
Yeah, that very is much. That is very much Twitter. You know, he's tweeting out just ideas and thoughts and stuff. So no, he gets a lot of credit for being real savvy with the
Hmm.
public, and that's part of the appeal of those Marvel comics. That's why the kids, because it's kids reading them mostly by the millions, maybe at that time, young college kids, high school kids, younger kids. I mean, just attracted to these cool looking comics. Um, you know, there's all these stories about back to the the history aspect of the comics, like DC. You know, in the '60s, or look at their like before Neil Adams came and changed everything.
Hmm. Rest in peace.
Yeah, I know. That was a
Yeah.
shocker. And you look at the Marvel comics, the early Marvel comics, the editors at DC, like, these books are so ugly looking. They're garish, you know, big giant word balloons on they're talking about the covers,
Hmm.
big explosive titles and word balloon here. And you got to read this, kids, the biggest story of the year, and the art.
Yeah.
But these old stuffy guys at DC, they didn't get it. Well, yeah. Why I think the kids are buying all these ugly Marvel was punk.
Hmm.
Marvel was punk rock compared to DC in the early 60s. They were underground, they were alternative, they were punk rock, they were new wave, whatever you want to call it. And the kids flocked to that stuff.
Hmm.
So credit to the artist, the ideas behind it, you know, standing as crazy word balloons and captions. I mean, that sold the stuff, and that made Marvel the hot property in those early years, you know, and I think it's propelled them all the way, you know, to the modern era. And then of course now you got the whole movie segment of
Hmm.
Marvel, whole different animal. And you know, now everyone in the world, when I hear people at the supermarket, I was at the supermarket weeks ago,
Uh-huh.
and I probably had like I must have had a Marvel T-shirt on, like, you know, like classic Bronze Age characters.
Hmm.
And like she saw it, oh, I can't wait for the new season of Scarlet Witch. I'm like, I mean, like just like, you know, regular person, like, and that's fat. It's trippy to me. I'm not
Hmm.
hating a Scarlet Witch TV show, like, but you know what I mean? Like, it's so mainstream. People are saying, oh,
Hmm.
they're gonna watch Hawkeye next month, whenever it comes out, or they're talking about Moon Knight.
Yeah.
It's like that just trips me out to know, like,
Yeah, like the most obscure, like Moon Knight's
yeah,
like, yeah, C-list. Because yeah, I mean, like maybe like 20, 10 years ago, like it felt like even then it was kind of like a little more obscure, a little more like
yeah,
less mainstream.
right.
Yeah.
Because you know, now we've had 20 years of Marvel movies. I think it's like, okay, they've already established the top 10 guys characters as mainstream, but now we're Hawkeye, we're Scarlet Witch, we're Vision, we're Moon Knight. Like, wow.
Yeah, that's
Let's
crazy.
get down to Jack of Hearts. I'll get a Disney subscription if they can pull that off, if he looks correct and everything.
Yeah. Jack of Hearts and like God, like Ron. Oh, they don't have the rights to Ron, but I don't know. Ron
Yeah,
the
no, you're
Space
right.
Guy. Yeah.
We all realize that, unfortunately. Damn it, that's not going to happen, most likely.
Never know. But kind of going off of that, kind of wrapping up the show and everything. Um, we're kind of talking about some of the early Doctor Strange and the way his personality is and the way it is in the movies are such different beasts almost because it's like he has this like stoicism
Yeah,
in those early comics. He's really like kind of like they were saying it. They described it like a black magic. There's like kind of like a taboo sort of
right.
feel to him, I would say. And so it's so different to see him in the movies because it's like, yeah, I mean, they are jokey, but he's like a little more like a little more warm, a little like more Cumberbatchy, I guess. Do you have any like thoughts on like the adaptation?
Well, just like the Spider-Man first movie, Sam Raimi, 2002, Team Toby. Um,
Hmm.
I love that film. I know people say the second one's their favorite with Doc Ock and, you know, the story and
Yeah, I
everything.
love that one so
It's
much.
very good.
Uh
No, it
huh.
is. It's excellent. But the first one, like, I can't, you know, to me, like, whoa, they made a $80 million version of Amazing Fantasy 15.
Hmm.
I mean, the origin, like the Spider-Man origin comic story, I always thought was probably about the best, what, 10, 12 page comic ever made. I mean, because the story is such a
Yeah.
fable, it's such a lesson, like, you dumb jerk, you know, your uncle died because you got cocky the minute you got
Hmm.
your powers and your costume. And such a great lesson. And that's in the movie.
Yeah.
And
Every panel in that original comic is just like iconic, and you know.
yeah, and Raimi caught that. So with the Doctor Strange movie, it's like wow, they kept the origin. Like, yeah, he's a jerk.
Hmm.
Stephen Strange is an arrogant jerk in the beginning, cocky, whatever, and just pay the bill, whatever. And then he has a transformation when he crashes and he gets humbled and he's broken, literally broken inside
Yeah.
and outside. And he's and desperate. A man of science is so desperate at that point he can't get medical help for his hand. He goes to supernatural elements to try to heal him. But that's right. That's right from the comic. So I appreciate that because some of the origins they change in from movie to comic in the
Hmm.
any movie. So I appreciate that. Like, yeah, we got that arrogant Doctor Strange, so it's a better story arc. He's something in the beginning of the film, and then he's different. I mean, I get tired of in general the jokey Marvelness, but
Yeah.
Doctor Strange he doesn't start that way. So good for them for making him unlikable as he's supposed to be in the beginning. So
Yeah.
I did enjoy the film. I did
Yeah, no,
enjoy it.
it's great. I mean, because yeah, we were just talking about before the show, just kind of, appreciate No Way Home, which we're fans of, just like course correcting Spider-Man because he's like just a little too Iron Man esque, like he doesn't have the same problems he does in those original comics. Even though I like the Marvel trilogy enough, yeah, there's certainly a lot of critiques to be had for sure.
I mean, he's a very appealing actor.
Um,
The teenage Peter Parker, like you get that back, in a film. But yeah, I was never. It always bothered me all the billionaires apprentice thing and da da
mhm.
da. But um, yeah, like you said, course. I was really surprised at the ending of the Spider-Man film. The third one, it's like, wait a minute, is that a costume in the corner? And like, I can't believe they did this. And it was
Yeah.
exciting, but at the same time, it's like, not to criticize that movie, but
Mhm.
my problem with that, even though it's fun seeing the cameos, that was like a big deal. Like, wow, the idea that a superhero has a personal problem, like everybody knows who I am, which of course is miserable if they, but that the Sorcerer Supreme would screw with our mind. He's screwing with your mind, my mind,
Yeah.
6 billion minds by making us forget one thing.
Uh-huh.
And it's not the most tragic thing in the history of the world. We
Yeah.
can 100 horrible world tragedies. I mean, I'm sorry for Peter Parker that his life screwed up. Everybody knows who he is, but like after I saw the film, I liked it, and then I immediately, it's one of those things where the plot is so complex and it turns on a little thing, and it kind of falls apart. Not falls apart, but it's like that's such a seems like it's such an unethical thing for the
Hmm.
Sorcerer Supreme to do. Um, but if you treat it like a comic and just gloss over it, like, well, I want
Yeah.
to enjoy the whole thing, and then the
Hmm.
next that comes up. So
Yeah. Also, I really appreciate because I get really tired of this critique for Doctor Strange, where it's like, especially in the comics, I remember whenever he was in an event, he was in an event book or like crossing over, they'd always be like, he's like this Deus Ex Machina character. And it's like, I don't really think he is because there's like limits and like kind of boundaries of his like spells and,
should be
yeah. I mean, I think it really depends on the writer. Like, I don't know, it's like writing Superman where people
right,
say it's difficult. So like, well, if you don't know how to use him.
right. I mean, Superman, the majority of his life, the first 50 years, yeah, he could spin the world around or whatever. He'd always have a new superpower, and it is very convenient. But yeah, a good writer could hopefully establish. But then the thing with comics nowadays, I mean, like you get a new writer on Doctor Strange, they make a big thing about it. They hate when they renumber the book number one for this,
Yeah.
just for this writer.
Hmm.
They do a 12 issue arc, 24 maybe, but I doubt it. They do
Hmm.
12 and they leave and they get to trade paperbacks, so they get the residuals and they're set. And then the new writer comes in. Oh, I'm going to retool it. The spells work. So I mean, you know, if you're going to ask me if I read any current Doctor Strange or anybody, FF, I know I don't. I haven't read them for, I don't know, 20, 30 years. I mean,
Yeah.
I love the characters I love the comics that I loved when I was
Hmm.
younger. I love that Spider-Man. I love that. But I'm not one of these guys who can read Iron Man for 50 years.
Yeah.
I mean, I know that it gets rebooted nowadays. That's the word, with a new writer every arc.
Hmm.
But I don't know. Character like that doesn't have interest for me. It's like, well, I don't know. It's like I don't know. It's like a bicycle that everybody just rides around on it.
Yeah. I think that's also good to kind of like step away from the characters too, because I've like I've like collected Batman for God like 20 something years, and like there's certain arcs or whatever that just aren't
Right,
for me. I mean, like I'm aware of them. I'm like, oh, that's cool, but
right.
it's also nice to just like step away, and then when you see something like, I don't know, fans when they like read Hush or something by Jim Lee, they're like, oh, that's cool, and then they kind of flock back. It's kind of like revisiting like your hometown or like a friend.
Right,
I
right.
think that there's like a beauty to that almost.
Yeah, but yeah, the break is important. You're right, and you come back to it because you're kind of hungry for it. It's like, you know what? I haven't read a good stretch of Batman for 10 years, and like, oh, I like this run or whatever run you like. Yeah.
Yeah. And then I guess last question for you: do you have any recommendations for any Doctor Strange comics people might not be aware of?
So of course the Ditko ones will be the obvious one, but I really like the stuff Gene Colan, the artist, did. He had two runs. One, I think Roy Thomas wrote it in the late '60s. At the point where Doctor Strange had a mask. Believe
Oh
it or not,
yeah,
a
is it?
full black mask with eyes, and I think you can see his teeth somehow.
Yeah, I've
Um,
never heard the origin of that. Is it just kind of?
I heard a dumb reason. I think they said literally the sales were sagging, so I think they figured, well, give him a mask so he looks
No,
like a superhero. Like that actually sounds so dumb.
I believe it.
It's probably true. Like at least that era of comics, they're still kind of kid oriented. So, um, but Gene Colan is fantastic art, and Roy Thomas did some pretty wild stories. I got an omnibus of that stuff, and then Gene Colan came back in the mid '70s, maybe.
Hmm.
Um, Kind of like when he's doing Dracula. If you really like
Oh
his
yeah,
Gene Colan, those just dark shadows. That's the best way to describe his art. A lot of billowy smoke and black shadows. That was a good, nice Doctor Strange run. So past that, I can't tell you. You know, into the '80s onwards, I can't honestly say I can think of too many Doctor Stranges I've read. But
hmm,
dig into some of that old stuff. Look up Gene Colan and try to find some collections with either of his eras, '60s or '70s. Hopefully you will too.
yeah, yeah. Try to use like something like a Marvel app or get them off Amazon. Because
Right, Marvel app or yeah, Amazon or eBay if they're no longer in print.
yeah,
It's frustrating to me when I want a certain story arc and it's
hmm,
like the book's not in print. I mean, I guess they can't keep every book in print, but
yeah.
the ones I want are never in print, and they're $100 on Amazon or eBay.
Yeah, who wants that?
Yeah,
But yeah, I guess wrapping up, Javier. Thank you so much for your time, for imparting us with your wisdom and like the expertise of kind of this like all the Ditko backstory and everything. I always appreciate talking to you with that and everything. It's always like insightful. Um, yeah,
sure. And it was fun for me. I mean, yeah, you rekindled a lot of memories or things I hadn't considered exactly. So that's all. Yeah, it's always good to have a nice little conversation with somebody else on one particular topic because there's always different ways new things come up.
no, definitely. And is there anything you want to promote or kind of plug before we let you go?
The most recent book I just did, and I debuted it last weekend at the Latino
Oh,
Expo. So I
nice,
have this my character El Muerto. I've been doing 24 years. It's the original El Muerto, folks. This
nice.
is a collection of the first three issues from 1998, 2004, 2008.
Hmm.
They've been out of print, what, 15 years, whatever, 20 years. So they're in a collection. Pretty, pretty reasonable, 80-page giant. Talking about DC Comics, right? It's a little homage to the old Batman 80-page giants. So this is available on Amazon. My books are on Amazon. If you look up El Muerto Origins, Javier Hernandez, they can see it. I'll put it in my web shop. But I know people like Amazon because free shipping if they have Prime. So I can't compete with that. I get my cut of it. Don't worry. So
That's
if you
good.
want to,
Yeah.
yeah, you can do it through there. So that's the latest thing, and I'm working on the second El Muerto graphic novel, and the inevitable follow up to the Ditko zine. There's always more to talk about. So I don't know when I'll get that done, but I'd like to do something else with Ditko.
Yeah, yeah, in due time. But no, I always enjoy checking out your work. I'm gonna have to support that and buy it. Especially considering both from Whittier. It's good to also support the hometown too. Local comic
Yeah, yeah.
artists. No other place
Nixon's not
like it.
Nixon's not the only thing we're famous for.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, I was gonna say that's the most notorious resident. I feel.
I probably would. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. There's that part of him. Yeah.
Hmm.
But then
But
we put a
mhm.
president in the White House. I mean, How many presidents are there? Was it 40, 30, 38, 40?
46. Yeah.
So how many cities in the country can say that they put a president in the White House?
There you go.
Anyway, yeah, I don't want to get off political controversy.
No, it's all good. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
there's
yeah.
variety too.
Cool. And then Javier, where can people find you at social media wise?
Well, Instagram seems to be the most popular, or at least, very popular. So yeah, Javier Los Comics. I imagine I'll have a link on this later. So
Yeah.
I'd recommend people check that. I'm always I'm always posting. Remember I said in the beginning, I do like social media. So always updating people on my work, what I'm working on, what I'm doing, and whatever upcoming events.
Cool. Be sure to follow you there. And you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, G9892. You can follow the Waffle Press on Twitter at the Waffle Press, on Instagram at the Waffle Press Podcast. We're on Spotify, iTunes, and SoundCloud, and YouTube. Thanks for listening. Thanks for watching. We've been Professionally Unprofessional.